Hi everyone, I'm Nikki, and at Mechacon from July 23rd to 25th, I'll be running games of Games Workshop Warhammer Quest Cursed City. And in this video, I'll be painting one of the monsters you may encounter while playing in the game, a monstrous Vargskyr. Also, if you like this video, please visit my YouTube channel, check out some of the other videos I've created, all devoted to Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and subscribe. So this is going to be the first of a series of painting videos I do called Beauty Models, where we're going to turn a drab piece of plastic into what you see here. So let's get started.
So here we have our boy. Gonna make him nice and pretty, and forgive me if my voice changes intermittently. I've not really had a lot of practice with vocal training, and so my inflections are gonna be weird. And, you know, we're gonna just deal with this right now, right? Because all we're here for is we're watching to see this guy get painted. So I'm going to start with the unfurry parts that are going to be the exposed flesh. And I'm going to do these in Tuscarora Fur from Citadel. Now, normally when we talk about Citadel paints, we talk about, what's that word? Thinning. We thin the paints. And I've never been a big fan of actually thinning paints. So instead, what I've bought into is I do the air paints. And they're already pre-thinned. So we're going to need a couple of coats, about 2 or so for this one. And it helps preserve the details of the model from letting paint collect and essentially obscure them. That's what the entire point of thinning paints are supposed to be. I did base coat this, I primed it in the Wraithbone spray. Now, being here in the south, of course, with whites being some of the larger particles of paint to deal with, they're always some of the toughest ones to deal with. And especially with the humidity that happens over here, spraying from a spray can tends to, you might get some fuzzy results. Not exactly the best looking ones, and I'm not gonna lie, like, I'm one of the rare people out of my friends group that I don't mind using spray can priming as opposed to non-spray can. That said, I think a lot of my friends end up using air paints anyway for their priming. I don't think there's anyone that uses just straight onto the brush priming. I am an absolute heathen when it comes to painting because I don't use a palette also. I am definitely an iconoclast. I think we can describe me as that. Probably irreverential. I'm not necessarily purposefully rebellious. It's just that this is definitely a hobby for me, and so it's not something I'm going to get too scientific in particular with. Now, that said, though, you gain experience with these paintings, and you kind of figure out what works with you and what doesn't. I mean, I've been paintings for about 5 years now, maybe or so. I started out with AOS 1.0. The Realm Gate Wars series was just wrapping up, and they were doing the season of rebirth or whatever was the thing that they called, where they made all the first initial cities of Sigmar. And so that was when I actually just started painting. And because I never felt comfortable with, well, what's the way you're supposed to thin down paints? I've never felt comfortable with that enough to feel like I can make that work. And so at first, my first thought was, instead of using base coats, I did a lot of layer paints because layers were meant to be a little bit more translucent than the bases. That could have helped preserve a couple of the details that I was looking for, and I didn't have to worry about thinning down as much. I don't know where I got the idea to use the air paints from. I think maybe I was just messing around one day and I just bought one, or I was just, no, I think I was just searching up to see, because yeah, I know I definitely was curious about using air paint in some of the colors that they had, and so wanted to know how exactly they performed. And I saw someone mention that they perform as thin paints because supposed to be going into an air painter. They're not contrast paints. They're not a liquid you just slather on and move around a lot. They're honestly fairly good as a prior thinned down coat. I highly recommend it if you don't like the thin your paints process, but you recognize the reasons why it's there, why it's useful. I'm, of course, using the new STC brushes that Games Workshop came out with. I can definitely say, because I'm very uncomfortable in not being a content master about things, I'm all about, hey, these people probably know what they're doing when they're making paintbrushes, so I'm going to buy their paintbrushes. I could probably go to Michael's, sure, and get a Michael's brush, and it'd be just fine, but that just wasn't how I rolled. I maybe paid a little bit more of top dollar for this brush. That's just a fault of mine I'm going to have to live with, but I'm not going to lie. The new STC brushes, when they came out, I love them. The old hair brushes would collect their paint, get saturated with the paints, get a little bit stiffer with dry paint on them. The STCs, I've not had that issue with. Now, I've primarily been doing contrast work with them, so maybe with this model, which I'm using way less contrast than I normally do, maybe this will show one of the weaknesses of the STC ones, but so far, honestly, it's a synthetic brush, and it works very well at preserving its shape. That's one thing I love about it. It preserves its shape. It washes off paint easier too than normal. So, highly, highly recommend. So you can see I'm definitely avoiding the furry areas right now. And those I'm going to be doing in a darker brown. I can actually go into the furry areas of this one with this brown that I have, because what I'm going to do for the fur is I'm going to go into it with wildwood contrast paint. And being as dark as that is, I'm happy to have a little bit overlap with the rest of the monster to try and hopefully give it a little bit better look for natural hair follicles appearing on a body kind of thing. You hope that you don't get like a hard edge between them, but I don't know what this is going to end up turning out like. So let's hope and see. Anyway, so this is the start of it right now. We'll go ahead and we'll come back when I'm done finishing this. Okay, so I finished base coating him in the Tuskor 4. As you can see that, honestly, the flesh really looks nice. I was looking for what would be the air paint equivalent to Bugman's Glow. And I actually have an Excel spreadsheet that tries to compare colors based on hex values. That's something I'll probably explain and show one day in the near future. And it said that Tuskor fur kind of looks equivalent to it. So I was kind of skeptical of that, but honestly I can say, yeah, it works out pretty good. All right, so now we're going to get into shading this character. I have here some Carroburg Crimson. And what I was looking for was that there was a paint profile that Games Workshop has for different types of color combinations and looks that you want to get. And this one was called Inflamed Flesh. And so it was Bugman's Glow, Carroburg Crimson, and then Kislev Flesh. And the idea is that it's going to end up being a pale in the light skin, with very red undertones after that. I think it was, of course, trying to mimic inflamed, as in, say, inflamed with, well, you know, for the Nurgle fans out there, right? Inflamed with pus, inflamed with an infection, things like that. And so that's what you get with inflamed flesh. And the Vargskyr is a type of a vampire. They call him Soulblight, of course, in Age of Sigmar. But so the Vargskyr is a vampire that has given in to its bestial urges. It's actually a type of vampire called the Virkos. Now, in Age of Sigmar, there's different families of vampires, and if you've ever played Vampire the Masquerade, this sounds pretty similar to that kind of concept. And so what you can think of this family of vampires, these soul blights called the Virkos, you're getting a group of people that are kind of like the Gangrel. They're animalistic, they're very wolf-like. And that's kind of what happens here, is that the Vargskyr is a soul blight that could not control its animalistic side, gave over into it, and mutated into this big ugly thing. Now let's take a look here at how my shading work is doing. I'm of course using the Carroburg Crimson Shade, and you can tell the details on the face are really coming out nice and well as the shade gets into those grooves. And that's going to look really nice once when I get the Kislev flesh on to go on to layer on top. And in fact, I'm going to probably do a dry brush of Kislev flesh once when I'm done with this. But here's the shading going on right now. This is the face with it, and you can see it brings out some really nice details on the face. And we'll come back once when I'm done with this and we're ready for the Kislev flesh. So here's my Vargskyr, all shaded up, and you can see that the details definitely come out a lot better. So I was in the middle of explaining also, besides what a Vargskyr is, the relationship of this stuff with Vampire the Masquerade, incidental relationship as it is, and also why I was doing a paint tone known as Inflamed Flesh, which, by the way, now I'm going to be going on to the layering, highlighting step. I'm going to do a dry brush of Kislev Flesh. I unfortunately only have the air paint version of it. I don't have the normal one of it. And for dry brushing, the air paints aren't exactly the best at that. So I put some paint on my brush here for my dry brush. I got a little towel here, and then I'm going to try to wipe a lot of the paint off on the towel so that way it has just some paint tone in it, but the wetness of the paint is gone. And this is a couple of steps to take on this one because I need to get a lot of paint tone on the paintbrush, and that doesn't quite stick as well in terms of with the thin down air paints as it would be with a normal Kislev Flesh from a little small pot. But that's okay. I can work with this as long as I don't have enough on it that's equivalent to an overbrush on it. But even still, a little bit of an overbrush on this, guys, not going to be too bad. The details are still going to be preserved, and I think this is going to really bring out the flesh tone to make it look like what I'm hoping I'm going to get. So what I liked about the idea of inflamed flesh is, besides it being, say, something equivalent to someone's got an infection going on with them, what I liked about it for a bestial vampire like this is that it shows a collection of blood in an unnatural way on the body, as if the body has this blood in a position or is moving it in ways that aren't normal. And I think that really helps highlight something about a vampire, right? Which is, it's a thing that needs blood, and it pushes that blood through little magic of its own in a very unnatural state. The blood circulates through the vampire body in a very unnatural way. So this inflamed flesh concept can kind of show that with it too, and that was kind of why I wanted to go for this paint scheme. So we can see here that, look at that. That is some nice details coming out with it with the Kislev flesh. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to come back, and then we're going to go ahead and start on the fur with this. See you in a little bit. And we are back. Wow, take a look at this. Honestly, it's really good what the dry brushing did with this. And this is honestly a good model to do the dry brushing with, because the details on the skin, very, very easy to be caught with a good dry brushing. And it helps preserve it. It gives us kind of this leathery type of look to it that I absolutely love. And it works in any direction that you want to dry brush in with it as well. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to get into the fur. I have here Contrast Wildwood. This is going to be able to help out with that, and I think this is going to give that fur a nice deep brown color that I am going to enjoy on the fur. So here we have it here, and now we're just going to make sure we have enough on the brush. And I tend to like my contrasts with enough on them that it pools a little bit on the model, because I kind of like to do this little swirling here of the contrast with it. And I've never been a big fan of having just small amounts of contrast to cover an area with, just because it kind of makes it a little bit streaky. So whenever I have this, at least an amount on it that's able to kind of pool, it can cut down on the streakiness. Now, one of the benefits of this model too, again, is the amount of detail on the fur. Honestly, I don't need to worry about doing that, really. The streakiness of contrast often comes when you have broad, flat spaces, and we don't have that really in the case of this one. I just got to make sure that we have enough of an intensity of the brown of the fur to be able to work with it. So here's what we got going on so far with it. I'm going to go and finish this off. We'll come back, and then we'll talk about what I'm going to do to bring out a little bit more detail on the fur after this. And here we are done with the fur. Now, I could probably leave it like this, and honestly, this doesn't look too bad. But I'm going to try a couple of different things. I'm going to try another dry brush on top of the fur to try and bring out a little bit more detail of it, starting with Dawnstone over it, and then I'm going to go into Baneblade Brown. So first we're going to do the Dawnstone. Right here. Again, Citadel Air, and again, not the best to use for a dry brush. I'm going to be using a small dry brush for this one here. So we're going to see how this works. Same thing, I'm just rubbing it now on top of the paper towel. I'm going to add on a little bit of light, extra light for me to be able to work with under it, so watch out. And here we go. It's kind of a white light, but it helps me be able to see a little bit, and I think you can still preserve a lot of the detail of the model as I'm working on it here. So here we go. Dawnstone onto the fur now. And my biggest worry was whether or not the Dawnstone was going to be able to, say, take out the brown. And honestly, I don't see that happening with it. I think it's doing a good job. It's bringing out a little bit more of the detail. Or, you know, it could just be placebo effect, maybe. Maybe that's all that it is. And honestly, this is such a quick step that I'm not going to really need to take the breaks in between for both sides. So we'll just go ahead and we'll, I guess, carry on a conversation. This model, of course, I'm going to be using for presenting Cursed City at Mechacon Omega this year in New Orleans. It's going to be towards the end of July. And I've actually been volunteering for Mechacon and their tabletop department since the very beginning. And it's going to be kind of a bittersweet memory for me, really. I was there when it started out in Lafayette. I was there when it was in the little dungeon area. I was there when it was moved to New Orleans. I had a brief 1 year stint being in charge entirely of tabletop. I had to bow out of it this year just because of the coming of a new member of my family with my wife. So, but I used to be in charge of panels there, and I was the first panels director there, and that's always going to be a soft spot in my heart as well for that. Uh, yeah, it's something, you know. 15 years? No, more than 15 years, right? Let's see. It started out, its first one was 2005 because that was the year Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. Wow. So let's see. It starts out in 2005, 2021. This will be the 16th one, I think. My math is probably really off, and honestly, too, if the con head hears me about this, he's definitely going to correct me about it, I'm sure, at some point. But anyway, hell of a year for me to actually finally come out as a woman and present as a woman now. So now what I have is I have Baneblade Brown, and it's a very, very light brown. The gray, I am honestly surprised. Like, you can tell there's a little bit of gray in the fur here, but it doesn't overcome a lot of the brown, and the brown's kind of a little bit preserved. So now I'm going to use this Baneblade, and hopefully it's going to be very distinct, at least, from the redness of the body. Let's see. That's not bad at all. It's really not. It's giving a vibrancy to the fur that the Wildwood contrast didn't have normally. So I'm very happy with this. And it's going to blend in nicely as I'm dry brushing over. If I happen to hit parts of that are Kislev flesh, it's honestly not going to stand out much from the Kislev flesh. So it blends in really nicely, but it helps bring out more detail in the fur, making the fur a little bit more distinct from the rest of the flesh. That's good. Honestly, I was really the most concerned about really using the Dawnstone. I just did not know. And the reason why that is because I use an algorithm for my layer paints, for what goes up on them. And basically what I try to do is I find what's the HSL numbers, the hue, saturation, and luminance of a color. And so when I work with a base coat that's normally your darker colors, I'll up the luminance in an algorithm for the next colors. And almost universally for the browns, Dawnstone comes up as not the highest highlight of the browns, unless that's where you want to end with it. But at least the mid-tone for it. Generally what it works with is that if I do the browns, I'm going to go my deep browns, which are your Mournfang brown and your Dryad Bark brown. And then your mid-tone brown is going to be, your next brown up is going to end up actually being Deathcore Legion Drab. That comes up a lot. That one especially for Dryad Bark. And then after that, you get into Dawnstone. Now, if you keep going up at least a little bit with it, you'll hit then your Baneblade browns and your really, really lighter browns like that too. But it always makes me worried about the Dawnstone because I'm worried about, like, will the gray wash out anything? And honestly, it really doesn't. Look at that beautiful boy. Okay, I'm going to do just a little bit of cleanup now. We're going to have to take care of some things such as the teeth and the eyes, and there's going to be some details that are going to take it out of the camera for the moment, but when I come back, we'll show you the finished figure. And here we are. It is all done. And if you can take a look here too, I have him right next to the big bad for Cursed City, Radakar the Wolf. Sadly, I painted the Radakar a long time before I thought I was going to be making painting content for Warhammer. So, there won't be a video for me painting this bad boy. It was honestly a very fun one, but I like this Vargskyr. I like the model. I like the type of creature it represents in the game. And honestly, in terms of painting, this was a really easy paint job to be able to do. So thank you for watching. And of course, you can catch this model and others more I'm painting at Mechacon Omega in New Orleans. Hope to see you there and hope you get to play a game with me. Goodbye.